I never thought a simple cup of coffee would mark the end of my relationship with my daughter. But it did. It was early morning. The sun had barely risen, and the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee, like it had every day for years. I stood there in my flannel robe, wrapped in the old cardigan I'd worn since my husband passed. Carla, my daughter, was already at the table, her eyes tired and tight. Her son, my grandson, sat next to her with those giant headphones on, not even bothering to greet me. I knew what was coming. It always began like this, casual words masking another request. This time it was a school trip to Japan, as she called it, like it was nothing. Like I was just supposed to hand over $5,000 without blinking. I told her no, quietly, but firmly. That's when it happened. She grabbed her coffee mug, one I'd gifted her from a craft fair years ago, and hurled it across the table. The ceramic exploded at my feet. Either pay up or disappear, she screamed. Just like that. No hesitation. No shame. I froze. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just clutched my cardigan tighter, as if it could protect me from the sting of her words. This was my kitchen. My home. The same floor where Carla took her first steps, where I used to lift her onto the counter to help me bake cookies. And now she was treating me like a burden. Like I didn't belong. But that wasn't the real heartbreak. The real pain was that it wasn't a shock. Not really. She had said it out loud for the first time, yes, but she had been saying it in other ways for years. Since they moved in, just for a few weeks, and slowly made themselves permanent. Since I paid off their debts, covered their groceries, filled in every financial gap with my pension. Since I stopped being mom and became, can you help with this? They stormed out after her outburst. The front door slammed so hard the windows shook. I was left standing among the shards of that shattered mug, and something else, something invisible, shattered with it. I didn't clean up right away. I sat down. I closed my eyes. And in the silence, with broken porcelain at my feet and the echo of her words in the air, I realized something. That, disappear, she spat at me? Maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe it was an invitation. Maybe she meant it as punishment. But I felt something stir in me, something I hadn't felt in years. Dignity. And if disappearing is the price I have to pay to get it back, so be it, but not the way they expect. I won't vanish in grief. I'll step away in silence, with purpose. And this time, I won't be looking back. The house was quiet after they left, but inside me, the noise was deafening. I knelt on the kitchen floor, picking up the broken pieces of Carla's mug with trembling hands. I didn't cry. I just moved slowly, carefully, as if the wrong move might make the whole house collapse. Maybe it already had. The silence felt like a stranger in my home. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles in after a betrayal. A silence that watches you, reminds you you're alone, even when your home is full of other people. I threw the shards into the trash and stood for a moment, leaning against the counter. My knees ached. My chest felt hollow. The coffee had gone cold. I didn't bother pouring a new cup. They left behind their mess, like always, crumbs on the table, a sink full of dishes, an empty cereal box shoved back into the cupboard. Small things, but they screamed louder than any fight. They were reminders of how little respect they had left for me, for this house, for everything I'd given. I walked into the living room and sat in the old armchair my husband used to love. His cardigan still hung over the back, untouched since he passed. I pulled it over my lap and held it there, like armor. Like memory. Last year, I sold his coin collection. Every piece carefully saved from our travels, each one with a story. Carla needed money, just for a few months, while she got her business going. And I believed her. I always believed her. I wired her over $6,000 without blinking. Then I helped pay for her son's braces. Then for their utility bills. Then their car broke down. Then came birthdays, Christmas, school fees. One thing after another, like a leaky faucet that never stopped dripping. And I gave. I always gave. Because that's what mothers do, right? But somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing me as a person. I wasn't mom anymore. I wasn't even grandma. I was an ATM with a heartbeat. A convenience. And that realization stung more than anything. I thought about the night they moved in. Carla had cried, oh, she was so convincing. Said it was just temporary, until things stabilized. I believed her. And little by little, they took over. My routines, my space, even my favorite chair. I adjusted. I tried to make it work. I told myself it was love. But love shouldn't feel like erasure. I looked around the living room. The plants I once cared for had withered. The photos on the wall were all of them now, Carla's family, Carla's life. I had disappeared from my own home, long before she ever said the word. And now, her words haunted the air like smoke, pay up or disappear. She had drawn a line. And for once, I wasn't going to cross it. I sat there, holding onto that old cardigan, and I asked myself something I hadn't dared to before. When did they stop seeing me as family? And more importantly, when did I start letting them? That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding an old photo of Carla when she was 5 years old. She had on that yellow sundress she used to love, the one with daisies, and her chubby little arms were wrapped around my neck. We were in the park, and I remember the moment so clearly. She had just finished crying because I had to leave for my shift at the hospital. She didn't want me to go. "You're my safe place," she said. My eyes stung, not from sadness exactly, more like recognition. That little girl, where did she go? And what did she grow into? She used to need me. Genuinely, not just for money or rides or favors. She needed my warmth, my voice, my arms. I gave her everything I had, and I did it gladly. And now? She won't even look me in the eye unless there's a price tag attached. The bedroom was dim. I hadn't turned on the overhead light. Just the soft glow of my bedside lamp and the ache of memory. All around me were traces of a life I no longer lived, books I hadn't touched in years, a jewelry box that hadn't been opened since my husband passed, shoes still in their boxes because I had nowhere to go. That night, I realized something that made my stomach turn. I hadn't been living in this house. I'd been surviving in it. When they moved in, it was supposed to be just a few weeks. Carla said they needed time to get back on their feet. And I, fool that I was, believed it. I moved things around to make space. Gave them the guest room. Then the second room. Then the closets. Bit by bit, they expanded, and I shrank. Until the only space that still felt like mine was this small bedroom. Even that was invaded sometimes. Her son would barge in without knocking. Carla would leave laundry on my bed, as if I were the maid. My favorite blanket disappeared one day. She said she needed it for the couch. It was never malicious, just careless, and repeated. So many little cuts, one after another, until I bled dignity. And I let it happen. I told myself I was being kind. That they needed me. That I was strong enough to carry the weight. But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's martyrdom. And I was tired of dying slowly in my own home. I placed the photo back in its frame and turned off the lamp. The darkness wasn't frightening. It was honest. It matched the truth I had been trying to ignore. They had taken over this house. But they had not taken over me. Not yet. The next morning, I sat out on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise like I used to before everything got so loud. The sky turned from slate to soft pink, the kind of slow, quiet transformation you miss if you're not paying attention. And for once, I paid attention. I didn't check my phone. I didn't listen for footsteps. I didn't brace for a knock on my bedroom door with another request disguised as small talk. I just sat, and breathed, and noticed how peaceful the world still could be when no one else was demanding pieces of me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. I didn't jump up to smooth things over, to make Carla breakfast as a peace offering, to pretend yesterday hadn't happened. I didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize. That silence she demanded from me, she was going to get it. But not the way she thought. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is a line in the sand. That afternoon, I made a call. Not to Carla, not to her son, to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The community board I used to volunteer with had a small network of local lawyers who helped seniors navigate housing issues. I had met Mr. Klein back when we worked on tenants' rights. Kind man, straight shooter, the type who listens without judgment. When he picked up, I said, "Mr. Klein, I think it's time I made some changes to my living situation." We scheduled a consultation. No pressure, he said. Just information. That's all I wanted for now. But in my gut, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't just information. This was the first brick in a new foundation. A different kind of future. I went back inside, set my empty teacup in the sink, and looked around the kitchen. my kitchen, though it hadn't felt like mine in months. Maybe years. Carla's dishes were still piled up. Her son's backpack was tossed on the floor like always. But I didn't pick anything up. I didn't clean. I didn't fix. I let the mess sit. Because it wasn't mine anymore, not the clutter, not the chaos, not the responsibility. It had taken up too much space in my head and heart for far too long. Out back, the wind had picked up slightly, rustling the trees. I pulled my cardigan tighter, not to hide, but to hold myself steady. Because something had shifted, not in them, in me. I wasn't going to beg for kindness anymore. I wasn't going to finance loyalty. I wasn't going to trade my peace for their comfort. Let Carla draw her lines. I was drawing mine too. And this time, I'd be the one stepping back, not in fear, but in clarity. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the corner of the local library's reading room, the one with the old green armchairs and tall windows that let in the morning light. I hadn't been there in years. I had brought a book, but I wasn't really reading. My mind was elsewhere, on phone calls, on paperwork, on that quiet strength that had started to root itself in me. I was waiting for Mr. Klein to call me back with the next steps. Across from me, a woman about my age sat with a copy of A Room of One's Own open on her lap. She looked over her glasses and smiled. "You downsizing too?" she asked, like we were already mid-conversation. "Maybe," I replied, unsure what I was yet doing. "Just thinking." She laughed softly. "That's how it always starts. Thinking. Then before you know it, you've sold half your furniture and booked a cruise you swore you'd never take." I smiled back, genuinely. There was something freeing about her ease, the way she spoke about letting go like it wasn't defeat, but freedom. She told me her name was Evelyn. She had sold her house 2 years ago after her kids stopped calling. Said it was the best decision she ever made. "They didn't come visit, but they sure showed up when I put it on the market," she said, raising an eyebrow. Suddenly everyone remembered I existed. We talked for a while, about gardens, retirement, how small spaces are easier to clean and even easier to leave behind if needed. She told me she'd traveled for 6 months after selling her house. "Not because I was running away," she said, "but because I wanted to remember who I was before I was just Mom, or Grandma, or the one who pays." That phrase stayed with me. The one who pays. It echoed something in my chest. Not bitterness, just truth. I looked around the room at the quiet readers, at the dust floating through sunlight, at Evelyn turning her page without a care in the world, and I wondered, what would it feel like to live for myself again? Not just exist, not just survive their demands, but live. That night, I made a list. Not a to-do list. Not a budget. A wish list. Things I used to love, painting, day trips, swimming at the rec center. Things I'd stopped doing without even realizing it. Little joys I'd traded for emergencies that were never mine. I stared at the list. It didn't ask for much. Just space. Just permission. The next morning, I picked up the phone again. I called Mr. Klein and said, "Let's move forward." He asked, "Listing the house?" "Yes," I said, "but keep it anonymous for now. I'm not ready for drama. I just want options." "Of course," he replied. "You're in control." I hung up, looked at my list again, and added one more thing to the bottom. A room of my own. 2 days later, I sat across from Mr. Klein in his office, a tidy little room with worn leather chairs and stacks of neatly labeled folders. The kind of place that smelled like old paper and quiet decisions. He greeted me with a warm handshake and a kind smile. "You look clear," he said. "I feel something," I replied. Not sure if it's courage or just exhaustion. He chuckled. "Sometimes they're the same thing." I told him everything. About the house. About Carla and her son living there rent-free. About the broken mug and the ultimatum. About the way they looked at me like a walking checkbook. He listened without interruption, taking notes, asking the occasional clarifying question. And when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You have more control than you think." Those words hit something in me. Not because I didn't know it, but because I'd forgotten. The house, he explained, was still in my name. No one else was on the deed. There were no rental agreements, no legal obligations. You're well within your rights to sell, to evict, to set conditions. This is your home, your asset. And what about the emotional part? I asked quietly. He paused before answering. That's the part that makes people stay in bad situations far too long. We talked through the options: selling outright, renting a smaller place, setting up a trust for my own long-term care. Every option made me feel a little more solid, like I was standing on ground again, not quicksand. I didn't sign anything that day. I wasn't ready, but I asked him to draw up the listing paperwork. Hold it, I said. Just in case. He nodded with understanding. We'll list it anonymously. No one has to know until you want them to. I left his office feeling like I'd exhaled for the first time in years. The sun was high by then, bright and unflinching. I stopped at a coffee shop nearby and sat by the window, watching people come and go, young couples, old friends, solo wanderers like me. I realized something as I sipped my tea: I didn't feel guilt. Not like I expected. Not for talking to a lawyer. Not for considering leaving the house. Not for thinking about a future that didn't include Carla or her chaos. I just felt possibility. For so long, I thought protecting my family meant sacrificing myself. That being a good mother meant being a quiet one. A giving one. An invisible one. But maybe the best thing I could do now was stop feeding the parts of them that treated me like a resource. Maybe boundaries weren't betrayal. Maybe they were protection. And maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to protect myself too. A week later, I stood inside a small antique shop on Maple Street, surrounded by porcelain teacups, faded postcards, and echoes of other people's memories. It felt oddly fitting. The owner, Linda, had been a friend once, back when my life was full of community events and garden club meetings. When I brought Carla here as a child to play with the wind-up music boxes. Linda gave me a long look as I placed the box of items on the counter. "These are beautiful," she said gently. "Are you sure?" I nodded. Inside were things I once swore I'd never part with: an ivory jewelry box, a set of silver spoons from my wedding, and a clock that had chimed in my kitchen for over 20 years. But none of them sparked joy anymore. They reminded me of who I used to be, and who I no longer wanted to be. "I'm downsizing," I said with a soft smile. "Time to let some things go." Linda didn't ask questions. She gave me a fair price, in cash, and told me to come by any time. I walked out of her shop feeling lighter. That afternoon, I began boxing up my personal belongings. Not openly, quietly. A drawer here, a closet there, always while Carla was out, or her son was glued to a screen with headphones on. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted escape. I called Mr. Klein and said the words out loud: "Go ahead and list the house." Anonymously, like we said. "Understood," he replied. "I'll take care of it." And then I did something I never imagined I'd do. I rented an apartment. A small, furnished one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. Walking distance to the park. No stairs. No shared walls with teenagers. Just peace. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't sentimental. It was functional. It was mine. When I signed the lease, the woman at the front desk smiled and said, "Welcome home." My eyes stung, just for a moment. Not from sadness, but from the realization that I was building something new. Alone. On purpose. Back at the house, I kept packing. One picture frame at a time. One teacup. One book. I didn't tell Carla. I didn't owe her that. Not after everything. My heart still ached, of course it did. I had hoped for so much more, for gratitude, for respect, for some trace of the little girl in that yellow sundress. But she was gone, and maybe I couldn't change her. But I could change the locks. That night, I taped up the last box from my bedroom and labeled it, "For the Next Chapter." It was the first time I had written something just for me in years. 3 nights later, Carla cornered me in the kitchen, again. I had just finished making dinner. Nothing fancy, just something warm. She came in late, her heels loud on the tile, her eyes already flashing with that mix of entitlement and impatience I'd come to know too well. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even sit down. "Japan," she said sharply, dropping her purse on the counter like it was a gavel. "His trip is non-refundable. I told you that. He needs that experience, Mom." I turned off the stove. Slowly, carefully. "I'm not paying for the trip," I said, without raising my voice. "I've told you that." That was all it took. She exploded. First, with her voice, loud, mocking, echoing off the walls. "Oh, of course not. Of course you're not. You're too bitter now, too. What, selfish? Is that it?" Then came the performance. Her arms flying up, her laughter sharp and hollow. "Unbelievable. You know what, you're useless now. You just sit around in this house like a ghost. Everything you do is to make a point." Behind her, her son, my grandson, peeked in from the hallway and laughed. Laughed. That, somehow, hurt more than her words. He used to draw me little pictures. He used to call me Nana, with a soft grin, and crawl into my lap while I read to him. And now he stood there smirking, like mocking me was a game. I didn't answer Carla. There was no point. She was already walking away, muttering insults under her breath as she slammed her bedroom door shut. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, in the heat of the food I had made for them, and realized I didn't want to serve another meal in that house again. I didn't even want to sleep there. That night, I packed the last of my boxes. My cardigans, my books, my framed photos, the few they hadn't replaced with their own. The tea set I had kept hidden at the back of the cabinet, untouched for months. I kept it quiet, methodical. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I moved like a woman who had made a decision. By midnight, everything I needed was taped, sealed, and placed by the door. I stood in the living room one last time. The furniture was still there. The walls still painted the same pale cream. But it wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. And I was done pretending. They could have the walls. I was taking my life back. The first night in the new apartment was quiet. Not the suffocating kind I had grown used to, the one filled with slamming doors, passive-aggressive sighs, and footsteps that never respected boundaries. No, this was a soft silence. Gentle, clean. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the box still warm in my hands. No one had texted to ask where I was. No one had called. For a moment, I thought I might feel regret. But I didn't. Just relief. The kind that settles in your bones when you finally exhale after holding your breath for too many years. The apartment was small, one bedroom, one bathroom, a little balcony with enough room for 2 chairs. But it was furnished, tidy, and mine. Mine. I didn't have to apologize for being here. I didn't have to justify my space, my routine, my existence. The walls were bare, but I didn't mind. There would be time for paintings, for memories I would choose to keep. For now, it was enough to have peace. My phone buzzed once. I picked it up. A single message from Carla. "You better be paying for this stunt." That was it. Not, "Where are you?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just a demand. A threat wrapped in casual words. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone, placed it face down on the table, and watched the leaves fall from a tree outside the window. Golden, crisp, free. They didn't cling to the branches that no longer fed them. Why should I? I thought I might cry. But I didn't. I just sipped my tea and let the stillness settle deeper. There was no note left at the old house. No dramatic exit. I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. Let them figure it out. Let them walk into that kitchen and wonder where the steady warmth had gone. Let them sit in the silence I used to fill. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor turned on soft jazz. The sound drifted through the thin walls, not intrusive, just present. And I found myself smiling. Just a little. Just enough. I had spent years trying to hold together a family that didn't want to be held. I gave them everything, my savings, my time, my patience. And they gave me silence in return. Now, for once, that silence was on my terms. And it felt like victory. 3 days later, while I arranged the last of my books on the shelf, I got a call from Mr. Klein. "Escrow finalized," he said. "The house is officially sold." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just sat down and stared at the window, letting the words settle like dust on a windowsill. The house was gone. My house. My burden. That same afternoon, while Carla was out shopping, probably with my money still warming the threads of her wallet, she returned home to find the place completely empty. No furniture. No grandmother. No pantry filled with groceries she didn't pay for. Just silence, and a man in a suit waiting at the kitchen island. "Ms. Carson?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. She blinked at him, confused. "I'm here on behalf of the new owners," he said, handing her a thick envelope. "This property has been legally transferred and is no longer in your name or that of your mother. You are now trespassing." She laughed at first, of course she did. Carla had always assumed everything was hers. Even me. Then she saw the papers. Real ones. Stamped. Notarized. Signed. Final. Her scream echoed down the street, I was told. The kind of scream that belongs to someone who just lost control of a world they never deserved to run. I wasn't there to hear it. And I'm glad. There was a time I would have rushed back. To calm her. To explain myself. To make sure she wasn't too upset. But that woman? She's gone now. I stayed in my apartment. Made myself some tea. Lit the lavender candle I'd been saving. And stared out at the sunset. I could imagine it. The look on Carla's face, the denial, the outrage. The storm she would surely whip up next. But it didn't scare me. Because there's something stronger than fear. Resolve. I had warned her without words. She told me to disappear. And I did. Not in shame. In power. A week after the sale, I walked back into the community center for the first time in years. It smelled just like I remembered, like old floor wax and paper flyers. The same bulletin board was covered with announcements for blood drives, book clubs, and lost cats. But this time, I wasn't there to volunteer snacks or fold brochures. I was there to speak. The director, Sandra, had asked if I'd come share my story. They'd started a new support group for women over 60 navigating financial stress and family estrangement. I wasn't sure I wanted to at first. But then I thought, maybe someone out there needs to know they're not alone. The chairs were set in a circle. About 10 women sat waiting, all with different faces but the same tired eyes. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice didn't shake. I spent the last few years believing that love meant saying yes. That being a good mother meant being endlessly available. That giving up my savings, my home, my rest was just part of the job description. They listened in silence. No one interrupted. No one looked away. I was told I had to choose, pay up or disappear, I continued. So I did both. I disappeared from the life they expected me to bankroll, and I reappeared in my own. A woman in the back wiped a tear. Another nodded so hard I thought her neck might snap. I sold the house. I moved out. I set boundaries. And I reminded myself, retirement isn't a prison sentence. It's mine. I earned it. When I sat back down, something inside me settled. Afterward, one woman came up to me, her hands trembling as she clutched mine. My daughter treats me like I'm a burden, she whispered. I thought I was the only one. You're not, I said, squeezing her hand. And you don't owe anyone your retirement. That night, walking home from the center, I felt taller somehow. Straighter. Like the spine I'd bent for so long had finally started to realign. In my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and flipped through my journal, the one I'd started the day I moved out. I saw words I'd written in anger, in fear, in grief. But also in hope. You don't have to earn the right to rest. You don't need their permission to be at peace. You were always enough, even when they treated you like less. I used to think silence was weakness. Now I know better. Sometimes silence is armor. Sometimes it's clarity. Sometimes it's the loudest declaration of self-respect a woman can make. That night, I slept without dreams. And in the morning, I didn't wake up feeling lost. I woke up remembering exactly who I was. A week later, I found myself sitting in a notary's office across from Mr. Klein again, but this time, the paperwork wasn't about property. It was about legacy. I want to rewrite my will, I said, calm and steady. He raised an eyebrow, as if to ask, are you sure? But I was. More sure than I'd been about anything in years. We went through the documents line by line. I removed Carla. I removed her son. I didn't do it out of spite, I did it out of clarity. Out of self-respect. In their place, I added 2 of my nieces, women who had called me every birthday without fail, who sent me handwritten cards, who once drove 3 hours just to have coffee with me after my surgery. I also added 2 organizations close to my heart, one that supports elderly women in crisis, and another that funds education for girls aging out of foster care. Are you certain? Mr. Klein asked one more time. This kind of change tends to stir conflict. I looked him in the eye and said, they've already burned the bridge. I'm just sealing the ashes. He nodded and got to work. While he drafted the documents, I handed him something else, a written statement, 3 pages long. A detailed account of emotional and financial abuse. Not angry, just facts, names, dates, dollar amounts, voicemails transcribed, text messages preserved. It would serve as evidence in case Carla ever tried to contest my decisions. Or worse, tried to paint me as mentally unfit. I wasn't naive. I knew how these things played out. I had heard enough stories in support groups to understand what came next when entitled children realized the money tap had finally closed. This was my insurance. And this time, I wasn't just protecting my peace. I was protecting my future from ever being rewritten by someone else. By the time we finished, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the office carpet. I stood to leave and paused at the door. "Thank you," I said to Mr. Klein. "You've done something most people never find the courage to do," he replied. "You reclaimed your name before they erased it from your own story." I stepped outside into the crisp air, pulled my coat tight, and walked with purpose. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was ready. Carla had always believed she would inherit everything. The house, the savings, my loyalty, my silence. What she didn't realize was this: inheritance isn't about blood. It's about legacy. It's about who stands beside you when you're down, not who shows up with a hand out when they think you're too tired to say no. That night, I placed the new documents in my locked drawer. Right next to my passport, my journal, and the receipt for the apartment deposit. All symbols of the same thing: control. And for the first time in a long time, I slept knowing the story of my life belonged to me, and me alone. Just when I thought I had tied every loose end, the universe handed me one last thread I hadn't noticed. It came in the form of a phone call from the bank. "Ms. Carson," the voice said, "we're calling regarding a joint loan in your name, from 2019. Co-signed with a Carla Carson?" My stomach dropped. I remembered then, vaguely, a day Carla came to me panicked, saying she and her son were going to lose their car unless I helped her qualify for a small loan. "Just help me get approved," she said. "I'll make every payment, I swear." I hadn't thought about it since. Because I trusted her. Because I wanted peace. Because back then, I still believed she would honor her word. "She stopped making payments 5 months ago," the clerk continued. "We've attempted contact. There's now a delinquent balance of $12,000, including interest and penalties." $12,000. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the irony. I had spent the last few weeks reclaiming every corner of my independence, only to find out she had quietly dragged my name back into the mud behind my back. I thanked the clerk, hung up, and sat in silence. The betrayal didn't surprise me. But the disappointment? That still cut deep. She had taken my trust, again, and treated it like a blank check. Not even the decency to tell me she'd defaulted. No call, no warning, just silence. I stared at the wall for a long time before picking up my notebook. I wrote down the amount. $12,000. Then I circled it, hard, over and over until the ink bled. That night, I made another call to Mr. Klein. "I want to pay the loan off," I said. "All of it, at once." There was a long pause. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "because once it's paid, I'm cutting every legal tie. I want her removed from every account, every document. I want a financial firewall so solid she couldn't breach it with a bulldozer." He didn't argue. It took 3 days to finalize. I paid the balance in full. Not because I owed it, but because I owed myself the right to walk away clean. I signed the last of the forms in Mr. Klein's office and left with a single sheet of paper in hand. Confirmation that the debt was cleared, and that Carla could never again touch my credit, my name, or my future. $12,000. A high price, but a worthy one, because some debts aren't financial. They're emotional. And this time, I wasn't going to let her bankrupt me again. It was a gray Thursday morning when I agreed to meet her. Carla had been served the legal notice 2 days earlier. The letter was clear. The loan was paid, her access to my finances was permanently revoked, and any future attempts to involve me without consent would trigger legal consequences. She didn't reply. Until today. She texted, "Let's talk." Just the two of us. We met at a small cafe near the courthouse. Neutral ground. I chose a table by the window. When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept, hair unbrushed, eyes red from either tears or rage. I couldn't tell. I didn't care. She sat without greeting me. Just dropped her purse and said, "You abandoned us." I didn't flinch. I sipped my coffee slowly. "After all we did for you," she added, louder this time. "You cut us off like we're strangers." I placed my cup down and looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said. "I cut you off because you treated me like a stranger. You stopped being family the moment you saw me as a wallet and not a woman." She blinked, startled by the steadiness in my voice. You think I'm selfish? I continued. You mistook my silence for weakness. But it was mercy. Years of mercy. She scoffed. You're playing the victim. No, I replied. I was the victim. Until I stopped letting you make me one. The cafe had gone quiet around us. People pretended not to listen, but I saw their glances. I didn't care. Carla leaned in across the table, her voice dripping with venom. You'll regret this. When you're old and sick and alone, don't expect anyone to come help you. I leaned back in my chair and let her words hang in the air for a moment. Then I said calmly, I'd rather be alone in peace than surrounded in servitude. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I've protected myself, I said. Legally, financially, emotionally. There's nothing left for you to drain. She stared at me, stunned. I stood, pulled a few bills from my wallet, and placed them on the table, enough to cover both coffees. I wish you healing, I said. But not at my expense. And then I walked out. I didn't turn back. The cold October air hit my face like a baptism. I inhaled deeply, each breath cleaner than the last. She wanted drama. I gave her clarity. She wanted guilt. I gave her dignity. And with every step I took away from that cafe, I felt the weight fall away, like chains finally breaking. The courthouse steps were colder than I expected. I wore my nicest coat, the navy one with the silver buttons I hadn't touched in years. Not for her. For me. Because today wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. I stood tall, clutching the final packet of documents in my hand. Inside, everything. A formal filing to secure my finances permanently. Legal language stating that Carla Carson was not authorized to access, request, or involve herself in any matter regarding my assets, medical decisions, or estate. Ever again. I felt calm, not just because the paperwork was nearly done, but because I had already survived the hardest part, waking up. Across the street, I saw her. Carla. She wasn't storming toward me this time. She wasn't shouting. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Maybe waiting for me to back down. To blink. To waver. But I didn't. I walked through the courthouse doors with steady steps and didn't look back. Inside, Mr. Klein was already waiting. Ready? He asked. Yes, I said. No hesitation. We went through the final review. I signed where needed. Every stroke of the pen felt like shedding skin. When it was done, he slid the file into a secure envelope and locked it in the cabinet. That's it, he said. You're protected now. She can't touch a penny. And if she tries, she'll be violating a court order. I nodded, breathing deeply. Thank you. We stepped outside together, and the wind met us like a friend. Across the street, Carla was still watching. But she didn't cross. She didn't call out. She just stood there, frozen in a story that no longer included me. I met her eyes one last time. And I smiled. Not out of spite, not out of triumph, but out of something much rarer, peace. Then I turned and walked away, my shoes clicking against the pavement with each step. The leaves swirled around me like dancers, brushing against my coat, my hair, my face. It was autumn in every sense of the word, an ending, yes, but also a beginning. For years, I had been afraid to let go. Afraid that without them, I would be nothing. But now I knew the truth. Without them, I was free. No more manipulation. No more guilt. No more bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes just to fit into their version of family. I walked to the corner, hailed a cab, and got in without looking back. As we drove off, the courthouse disappeared behind us. So did Carla. So did the past. The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Klein once more, but this time, we didn't talk about what needed to be done. We talked about what had already been finished. All the filings are complete, he said, flipping through the finalized documents. Your accounts are secure. Your estate is protected. Carla attempted to contest the home sale, but she's too late. I felt a small smile form at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't gloating. It was relief. Confirmation. She tried to challenge it? I asked. She did, he said, nodding. Claimed she was entitled to part of the sale as a resident contributor. But we had already documented her lack of financial participation. Your records were thorough. That statement you gave, about the emotional and financial manipulation, helped seal it. I leaned back in the chair and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was still holding. She has no legal recourse now? I asked. None that will hold, he confirmed. And we've added language to your will that includes a no-contact clause. If she tries to harass you or attempts to interfere in your affairs again, it becomes a matter of enforcement." It was done. Truly done. I looked around his office, so familiar now, like the waiting room of a second life. The same books on the shelf. The same photograph of his grandkids behind his desk. But I was a different woman than the one who first walked in here, timid and tired, clutching a bag of receipts and whispered doubts. I was clear now, whole, and maybe most importantly, I was protected. I began, then paused. "Yes?" he prompted. "I feel like I built a fence around my peace," I said. "And for once, I'm not the one holding the gate open." He smiled. "That's a good way to put it." When I left his office, the sun was shining. The air was sharp and bright. I stopped by the corner bakery and bought myself a slice of lemon cake. Something small, something sweet, just for me. Back in my apartment, I sat by the window and watched the wind rustle the trees. Carla hadn't texted, she hadn't called, and for the first time, her silence felt like a gift. Maybe she was plotting, maybe she was just stunned. Maybe she'd finally realized she had no more power over me. I didn't care, because I had made something unshakable. A boundary backed by law. A home not built on guilt. A life without apologies. And if she ever tried to claw her way back in, she'd find the gate locked, the key melted, and the welcome mat rolled up and burned. The garden behind my apartment was small, just a patch of green with a few benches and a crooked birdbath, but it was mine now. A place to breathe. That morning, I watered my plants, 2 begonias and a stubborn basil pot that refused to grow. It didn't matter. Something about the act, the quiet attention, the care, felt healing. Like I was growing, too. An elderly neighbor waved from across the garden. We'd spoken once or twice. Her name was Miriam. She always wore a purple scarf, no matter the weather. She smiled and I smiled back. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Carla hadn't contacted me since the cafe. Her silence stretched on like a road that finally stopped leading to my door. No knocks, no texts, no guilt bombs, and I didn't chase her. I didn't scroll through old photos wondering what I could have done differently. I didn't check my phone for updates I no longer wanted. I simply let it all be. Some nights I still woke up expecting footsteps in the hallway or voices arguing over who left the sink full. Then I'd remember, I was alone. Blissfully, powerfully alone. And the silence didn't scare me anymore. It comforted me. I joined a knitting circle at the community center. On Thursdays, I drank chamomile tea with women who told stories about their grandkids and arthritic fingers and old loves they never quite forgot. No one asked me for money. No one raised their voice. No one made me feel invisible. I started writing again, not emails, not grocery lists. Real writing, in a lined journal with a fountain pen. My story, page by page. Not to publish, just to remember. Because there's something sacred about writing your own truth before anyone else has the chance to twist it. I wrote about the house. The betrayal. The way Carla's eyes hardened over the years. The weight of being needed only for what I could provide. But I also wrote about the freedom. The apartment. The garden. The slow return of laughter. And one day, I wrote a sentence that surprised me. Maybe someone else needs to read this too. So I kept writing. And I kept living. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I wasn't bracing for conflict. I had exited the stage of their drama, and built a whole new theater where the spotlight finally landed on me. That garden became my place of peace. The sound of a trowel in soil. The feel of the sun on my hands. The smell of basil, however stubborn. I had no revenge plan. No last message. No pointed lessons to deliver. Because I didn't need closure from them anymore. I had given it to myself. The apartment felt different that morning. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. I opened the curtains wide, let the sunlight flood in, and stood barefoot in my little kitchen, humming a tune I hadn't thought about in decades. Something my mother used to hum when she was cleaning. Something soft, strong. It had been 6 months since I left the house. Since I walked away from the wreckage Carla and her son had made of my peace. Since I chose not to fight, but to walk. And you know what? Not once did I regret it. Not even on the lonely days. Not even on Carla's birthday when I didn't send a card. Not even when I passed that store she used to love and thought, briefly, about the little girl she once was. Because I finally understood something I wish I'd learned years earlier. Loyalty means nothing when it's only demanded, not returned. That morning, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. A young woman named Angela, from the support group I had spoken to at the community center. She wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to say no for the first time. Thank you." I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears come. Not tears of sorrow, tears of recognition, of healing. Because maybe this was always the point, not to fix the broken ones around us, but to show the other quiet women that they're allowed to walk away, too. That love without respect is not love. That family is not an excuse to bleed you dry. That peace is worth protecting, even if you have to protect it alone. I folded the letter and placed it in my journal. Later that day, I took a bus to the coast. I hadn't been to the ocean in years. I packed a sandwich, a blanket, and that journal full of hard-earned wisdom. The beach was nearly empty. Just seagulls and wind. I sat by the shore, watching the waves claim and erase, over and over. And I realized, I hadn't escaped my life. I had reclaimed it. There's a difference. And when I stood up to leave, I didn't feel old. I felt free. And freedom, my dear, has no expiration date.